مساء الخير جميعا، يعطيكم العافية وأهلا وسهلا فيكم. اسمحوا لي أرحب فيكم في اليوم بلقائنا النقاشي عن كتاب عمار خماش من إصدار دنجلة. أهلا وسهلا فيكم، أهلا وسهلا بالحضور الكريم. أنا عبد الله البياري من فريق الدارة، وبرحب بضيوفنا وبرحب فيكم بهذا الجو، وشكرا انكم اجيتوا. يعني بهذا الجو صعب انه الناس تيجي، بس يعطيكم العافيه واشد على ايديكم هذا الصبر والقوه. فعاليتنا اليوم هي من ضمن برنامج ديوان المعمار، وهو ديوان المعمار هو مساحه للحوار عن ممارسات معماريه، عن تداخل الممارسات المعماريه والفنيه، وهو لقاء شهري بيتداخل فيه الممارسات الفنية والمعمارية والنقدية، ولهذا السبب نستضيف ضيوفنا الكرام اليوم. الفعالية رح تكون بالإنجليزي، ووجب التنويه لأنه الكتاب مكتوب طبعا بالإنجليزي، وحجم المادة العلمية فيه الأكبر بالإنجليزي. أهلا وسهلا فيكم. الكتاب رح يكون متوفر هون للبيع على خصم بسعر خاص، رح يكون متوفر هون في القاعة على البيع. Good evening everyone. Allow me to welcome you. My name is Abdullah Bayari. I'm one of Al-Dara team. Allow me to welcome you all. Sarah Shalabi, founder of Dungula. Ahlan wa sahlan. You are, and she will be the facilitator of this evening. رأفت مجذوب. رأفت is the صح مجذوب ما عملت هذيك الجملة مش صح. Sorry. رأفت is the editor of the book, and our dear guest architect Ammar Khammash. This evening is part of Diwan Al-Mimar, which is a monthly program of talks featuring different intersection interventions of architecture, visual arts, and critical theory, if I may call. And this is a monthly meeting. With no more waste of time, allow me to welcome you all to this evening. أهلا وسهلا فيكم. سارة تفضل.
My name is Sarah Shalabi. I'm the founder of Dungula Publishing. Closer. I would like to thank Darat Al-Funun, its founder, Ms. Shuman, Ms. Luma, its event manager, Ahmad, Amin, and our friend, Rana Beiruti, for hosting the book launch today. It's an important day for us. But today is an interesting day in Amman also. It's a snow day, and we're very happy that you had the courage to actually come from all over Amman to attend this meeting and brave the weather. I would like to say that courage is the underlying force behind the work driving us to make this book. At Dungula Publishing, we are interested in creating content beyond the convention, whether in the form with our work in limited editions with artists and book art, and whether in its content with our architectural series. Our first book in this series is with Ammar Khammash, who had the courage to walk the journey offbeat, out of track, in discoveries and explorations. He accepted the challenge and allowed us to move unrestricted, unlabeled, unusually. Thank you, Ammar.
Thank you.
At Dungula, we've had many snow days or similar challenges in Beirut, where our publishing house is, in the past couple of years while making this book. Ra'fat Mujdoub here courageously took on the role of conception, interviewing, writing the first book from a place where an idea emerged around the kitchen table and needed application. Thank you. And I would like to thank also Reza Abedini, who found the courage actually and patience to listen to the craziest ideas of design and translate them in a clean, sleek design. Thank you, Reza. I would like to thank also Mariam Sultan, who courageously stood in her initial research, and Zaina Shamsuddin, where she had to take many exhausting work to make all the detail needed to finish the book. Thank you, Zaina. Thank you, Mariam. So, Shahida? Wow. I'd like to take on the word courage, because it's an important word for us. It's a moving force in the context we live in. We all live in, actually. In our cultural practices, every day in our region is a snow day. Every day, snow day. We are fed every day the continuous narrative that generates fear in us. And we choose every day to be afraid or to embrace the inner courage to create. And together, it takes courage to support and move beyond fear. So, Ammar.
Well, thank you. It's, thanks for everybody who made the effort to come in a difficult, rainy day. But also thanks for your esteemed publishing house and your courage to start this series. You know, it's a new idea, and I'm so happy to be the first, let's say, Arab architect, and all the hard work that you and Ra'fat and the team have given to this work. And I think it's very, very important to actually maximize cross Arab capital cooperation in a new way of looking at both art and architecture, and the discussion on what's happening, and especially that we are at a very critical crossroad. We're always at a crossroad, but like in the 80s and 90s, the crossroads were so subtle, and now we have like a very shocking, difficult to predict future, technically, and in terms of the architecture profession and the creative business altogether. Thank you all.
So, what we'd like to first explore is, I mean, this book is not made as a catalog for the building material, buildings and plans. It's more about what happens before and beyond the build construction. So, I mean, what we would like to talk about is the bits that cross into practices, when we use the word crossroad.
Crossroad, yeah. Well, let me just clarify how I came to be the person I am right now. I actually I studied in Jordan in high school, Terasanta College, and even through that time in the late 70s, I found that I'm extremely interested in the landscape, without boundaries. I mean, the landscape as a total, complete, full body of knowledge and experience. And let me tell you that the problem that the land sciences or earth sciences and landscape is actually divided into pieces for teaching purposes: biology, geology, ecology, and anthropology. And the big disaster is that the academic world forget to put back the landscape together as one piece. So I happen to be born with this passion to understand how things are made and how they come to existence. And I found myself first in 1978. Started to do watercolors and drawings of landscape in the area of Ajloun, north of Jordan. And by drawing and making artwork, it actually showed it was a reassurance, or maybe a tool of seeing the landscape. I mean, drawing something is seeing something, because drawing is a checklist of visual process and checklist that you have seen. If you want to memorize a building or a person, draw that subject. Even if you throw the drawing away, it's not important, it's the process of making it. And then I went to the US, which is the University of Southwestern Louisiana in 1980 to 85, and I studied the Bachelor of Architecture, and then went, all that time I was working on the Jordanian, village architecture and the architecture without architects, how a landscape and how ecology shapes the architecture product. And I was looking for tools outside architecture, like, temperature, climate, and vegetation, let's say the tree cover of a certain region and how it affects the architectural decision. And then I went to London to AA, Architecture Association, stayed only for 2 months, didn't like at all their approach, and I wanted more deeper tools. So I came back to Jordan and enrolled in archaeology and anthropology, a mixture of ethno-archaeology. It's actually, archaeology with anthropology together, and that was the golden time of the Yarmouk University, Ma'had al-Athar wal-Anthropologia at the times of Dr. Muawiyah Ibrahim, and they had a brilliant program where they took students who would like to do a master's degree. And those students came from any discipline. So in archaeology, they would have, if somebody comes out of medical, finished medicine, because in archaeology, we have, of course, diseases and we have injuries and bone, the entire study of bones. Or if you come from biology, or botany, and then you work on the food and the seeds, or if you come from architecture, you work on the buildings, because archaeology has everything, of all these disciplines are inside archaeology. And that gave me a fantastic tool, which is it's a reverse of architecture, actually. It's because in archaeology, we excavate and then we draw a reality that we find under the earth. In architecture, we make first a drawing and then we realize it. So it's upside down, which it's so exciting. And it all came together, I think later I self-educated myself in geology, and most of my friends are either botanists or geologists or, science that are outside architecture, which I use in directly or indirectly in my design process and in the methodology of my office right now. So this is the general, what happened in the last 40 years, if you will. And I think the book was a bit of a surprise because, here I am in the last 3-4 years, completely drowned in the Saudi scene, which is very overwhelming and exciting. And suddenly I have, a group of people coming to excavate in my office and dig for that history and things that are like in the drawers and in my mind, they're in my subconscious, And suddenly I see this combination, which is actually was surprising to me, to be honest. And thank you.
Is this working? Yes, it's working. Hi, everyone. Sure. Okay. Presidential. Okay, you can hear me. Yeah, I think. Anywho, so thanks again. I feel like this process is like there's so much gratitude that went into this project that I feel like I also want to start with before speaking, because it's a big part of the conception of how this project came about. Like it started out from a very intimate place of curiosity that we wanted to share with, well, each other, but then share with Ammar. And then there's something, I mean, like now I'm thinking, I get into this mind space that is very humbled, and I listen when we're speaking to Ammar because we're so used to this. Like this book was made over months and months of weekly conversations that were super open, super generous, and it trained us to kind of enter a beautiful, beautiful place when we're speaking about our culture, while everything was changing very violently around us. And now when I'm speaking to, like when Ammar is speaking, I just get into that place where it's so interesting to hear and learn about the formation of someone that really did not compromise any instant of a question and worked their way into finding the answer that is super, super inspiringly specific. And I feel like it's just worth noting that this was also a learning curve for us as we developed our series, because we started out with the question and like so much love, but also when we realized how you were interacting with the book, it was eye-opening for how to design the rest of the series. So again, so much gratitude. And I feel like my interest in this is, or my excitement about this book is that it would also enable, whether it's architecture students or people that are interested in the profession, to really understand that it is not just buildings and it's not just a specific way to make things happen. And actually it is a result of a lot of questions that have nothing to do necessarily with like a section or a plan, etc. And even your openness to having the book without any building pictures, just sites in progress and pictures from your archive, I feel is something that I would, we talked about this in Zoom doors, but I would like us to also maybe speak about your position with the material that lead to projects a little bit more. So for example, you would show us, like when we ask a question that is very spatial, it would be very matter of fact for you to show us a plant, right? And then speak about why this plant is very important and a thought process that eventually leads to a spiritual setting. And we would be sitting here and like, we understand completely why this is happening, but also at the same time, it's new, or it's it allows us this novelty of understanding something. And I feel like I would like you to speak a little bit more maybe about that process that feels like it's your life, like it's not a profession leading to buildings, it's someone's life that sometimes materializes in spaces. And you're mostly known as an architect, right? But this book is about this architect's kind of philosophy in life. And I feel like this intermingling and this permeability that you allow between your curiosities and your project is something that is very valuable. So if you could speak a little bit about this, I would be very happy to listen.
Well, let's face it. I think you've been betting on the right point, that publishing has to change. And because of the internet and the power of Google and the amount of ease and access to data. So the worst we want to do now is to do a catalog of buildings, an architecture book, which is normally architecture books are like a menu. And even architecture lectures. I mean, I go to important architects and they show like 5 buildings and almost like a menu, or like I've done this building and I've done that building. But I can go on the internet and Google all these buildings. So it doesn't make any sense. So I'm so happy that we, in this book, we're avoiding that kind of listing buildings and just celebrating buildings, if you will, as if they're final products. And the whole thing is about the process and what's the hidden secrets, if you will, of the profession. But the thing is that I'm again very lucky. I've been building a methodology. I don't have a style. I don't like the style. It's a dirty word we don't use in the office. So we have a methodology, and every time we have a new project, we actually reinvent the wheel. We start from scratch every time. And but I'm also very lucky that in the last 4 or 5 years, I mean, before a little bit, maybe RSAN and the Royal Society for Conservation of Nature, and some clients have given me the chance to experiment and to push the boundaries of, how traditional things are done in architecture in the traditional way and repeated. So, but now it's very interesting what's happening in Saudi Arabia, because they're actually looking for, this 30-year accumulation of how do I put together an entire landscape into a design. For example, I'm now working on a project. I can give a fresh, thing that have been in the last 3-4 days, almost getting a little bit hypnotic, or sometimes I'm a little bit out of focus or distracted because my brain is working in a very, tense way. It's a project, without mentioning the exact name, it's still in competition, but it's an invited competition, and I'm competing against international firms, and it's crazy. But I start from how it's a desert, and that has sand, a lot of sand. So I start from the beginning of how did all the sand came to be. And I'm so lucky because, they give us geological reports, and then I found, like a fantastic fault, which continues all the way to Jordan. So here I am using all my knowledge of how Jordan was created, all the faults. We have faults in Jordan that, like Al-Karak fault, Fayha, it's called Sada al-Fayha, that goes all the way to Medina Munawwara. So I'm really interested in this part of the world and how this, plate of the Arabian plate, if you will, talking about that and the earthquake, is actually shaped, and how does it, all the fractures and all the lines in it, and then how do I use all of that in a design competition, which actually starts to push me into looking at morphology and the movement and generation of sand dunes and the mathematics of that nature used. There's beautiful math hidden in nature. And in our office now, we're pushing for all kind of learning about the sand and allowing the sand to become the architect if we can. So I become a draftsman, or just like a lead architect under the master, which is the sand. So we start to play with the whole idea of counting how much sand can we have in our palm and compare that to the galaxies, and trying to make a narrative, a very, very strong narrative. And then pushing sand into performing architectural, structural morphology, and making a building where the construction of the building becomes the shell and the interior design. We don't do interior design. We actually want to make sure that the building is the interior design. The very bones and the skeleton of the building becomes the naked interior design on the inside, and showing the way it was constructed, and this is why we enjoy places like Petra and Jarash, because what you see is just monolithic, monomaterial. You don't have the shell and the fake veneer and gypsum board and whatever on the inside. So again, I think my interest in botany is very dear to me. I always thought that if I wasn't an architect, I would have been a botanist. And in fact, the only scientific paper that I've ever published, scientific, peer-reviewed paper, is in botany, and has been published by the Royal Botanical Society of Belgium. And it's about a plant that makes a very strange behavior in the Eastern Desert, called Rheum palestinum, which has a very strange, and what I've found that it does something which is new to science. Actually, it absorbs vapor. It's a vapor trap and absorbs vapor from underneath the leaf. botany is very, very close to architecture, and I think the only future of architecture and buildings are to become like trees, which means that they should do harvesting of energy. Trees do that. Clean the air. Trees do that. Produce oxygen and take CO2 and collect light and produce food. And so we can count 10 or 20 tasks that the tree has evolved for millions of years, reminding everybody that the plant kingdom is older than the animal kingdom. And so architecture is very much is about botany because it's rooted in a place. So if you want to be a good architect, I would definitely recommend knowing a bit about botany and ecology, and especially the habitats, how plants, like the architecture of fig tree versus the architecture of palm tree, so how tree biodiversity can point to a certain style in architecture, because both are shaped by the climate and the ecology and material and soil, earth, etc. But if you want to be a designer of airplanes and submarines and cars, you should, study zoology and specifically insects and fish. But as an architect, plant makes more sense. As industrial design, if you're designing moving, vehicles, etc., then zoology makes a lot of sense. But also, my brain is not only what's happening now. Like in botany, I'm also interested in paleontology, paleobotany, which is the fossilization of plant species in Jordan. I've shown very important scholars, some unknown tree fragments in the Eastern Desert, and that were fossilized at the time of when the dinosaur got extinct, late Maastrichtian. So I'm extremely interested in how nature behaves. And I have to say something. If I'm driving from Amman to Aqaba, I am actually I can see the landscape like a doctor looking at an X-ray vision of a skeleton. I know exactly in which layer of rock I am, and I know which age and the sedimentation climate and what's the content of. So, and people with me probably get bored because every time we cross a layer, I'm mentioning this is Al-Hissa phosphorite, and now we're crossing to Immerjam, and then they have scientific names to them, and they have dates. And so my brain is actually worked in this way that I'm always building this, holistic, anatomical, anatomy, if you will, model of this, piece of rock that we live on. And I cannot be an architect without understanding all of that, and actually also questioning who am I to add a piece of silly architecture on top of that beautiful, natural history, if you will. And
but is this like, do you think there's one question that drives this?
Definitely, I think it's important to always, as an architect, acknowledge that whatever is before you arrive to the site, is way more important and way more older and way more complex than whatever you can add.
The reason why I'm asking this is I think one of the important things in our conversation was the fact that we were trying to propose title, like whether you're connecting the dots or whether an artist, and you call yourself a service provider as an architect, and we always found it interesting. And we always found it interesting that these titles are very interchangeable, but at the same time, there feels like there's one momentum that is driving you. And this is kind of what I'm asking, like what binds all of this? And also, as you're sharing this with other practitioners or other creators, it's interesting. Like, I'm very curious about what connects all those dots for you, because they feel like it's an existential quest at all times, but at the same time, you can say that I have a client and I need to give them what they need. How does that fit? I mean, I know that this question can be very simple, but I'm just trying to dig into one of the open-ended questions that we have in the book, which is the role of the architect. and you can be very articulately humble in explaining that I was just trying to be efficient, but at the same time, it's so inspiring as a choreography that there's a layer, like there's your own question, even when you're providing a service. I'm curious about that, specifically because about like, I mean, you can just be driving and someone would be listening to like a good playlist, but you would be thinking about the age of the world. So I'm just, so where does that come from? And how does that factor into things that could just seem like a treatment of stone, you know? Because that question is always there, even when you like run around it. So what would you say that is?
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, I think architecture is a problem solving. And I think also, I mean, I like extremes, you know, I am a bunch of extremes put together. But I also like to say another thing that people don't like me to say it at all, which is that architecture is not art, you know. And this is why my problem with big star architects that are producing sculpture, you know. I am an artist myself, you know, but when I'm an artist, I put another hat and I work as an artist and I own the material, so I have the right to do whatever I want with these oil tubes and canvas or clay or whatever. But I shouldn't be an artist if I'm doing a house for you, you know. I'll make a house, I'll be a service provider, and then you can buy a painting from me if you want to add in the house. But I wouldn't make your house a statement of with my signature on it, you know, so that you live to glorify a signature, a signé by I mean, this is terrible what happened in architecture. And the society has created this kind of ego architects, unfortunately, and the media, you know. But again, at the same time, when you said connecting the dots or the points, I think the secret is not the points, it's the connecting, you know. And I'm interested in the peripheries of things and the overlap of things, and how, for example, how architecture overlaps with neurology, and how architecture overlaps with, you know, sound and sonification of patterns, and how architecture or morphology of architecture is a beautiful overlap, of course, in species of living things, and also in something that we start coining in the office, which is similar to biomimicry, what we're now starting, you know, researching very well in geomimicry. I mean, how geology makes shapes. I mean, geology is not alive, but geology grows and moves. I mean, you have crystals. Crystals are not alive, but they actually grow, you know, and they have an intelligence, a geometric intelligence. You know, they're not alive for one reason, because they don't reproduce yet. But we have to be careful there, because in geology, a lot of the processes in geology, you know, like sedimentation and crystallization, sometimes have some bacterial work within. So a bit of biology sometimes is actually changing the behavior of minerals. That's a fact. So, you know, I think for me, I'm really interested to push the boundary of creation. I know that word is a little bit, you know, some people don't like it because creation is only for God or nature, whatever you prefer. But I like to push the boundaries and make sure that if I could add something, and we are all here, every one of you is actually has one role in life, is to add something new and novelty, you know. Otherwise, fine, you can be a good, you know, banker or good something, but the whole world now is a race of somebody who could actually break a little bit a crack into. We're all on this life, which is like a big jar of glass, and we're all like a bunch of flies in that, and every fly wants to find a little crack to go outside. Okay, and I think this is, at least my brain is wired in that way, and it's not something unique. In fact, I think I'm completely Darwinist myself, so please don't get angry for those who, you know, believe in Adam and Eve, but I personally think that that from the beginning, let's say 4 million years ago, human, you know, certain early humans have decided to bet on manipulation of nature. And we're now we're manipulating physics and chemistry, and it's weird. It's really, we're going into the kitchen of all these disciplines in a dangerous way. It's going to be very wild ride for all the people younger than I in the coming 10, 20 years. You will actually have shocking things happening already now with AI. And so the speed is going to go much faster. But I'm bringing this up to actually say that our architecture is also about pushing the boundaries and showing that there might be better ways or different ways. Being different is not always better. You have to be careful. But maybe the more efficient ways, more meaningful ways, and more productive ways of shaping matter and giving material spirituality. And we have to be careful. The word spirituality, I take it in a very strange way. I don't think spirituality is for the beauty of it, you know, or beauty itself is not for the sake of beauty. It's all a survival kit. We're all spiritual because, you know, our species by spirituality has a better chance to protect its genetics and continue. So, you know, it's so complex. And sometimes I don't think about it. I don't sit down and write all these things. It's just my brain is so lubricated. It's so tuned to actually go into these web of pieces. And every time, again, every project, the pieces come together differently. And sometimes I'm surprised myself, you know, because I do something and I cannot remember why I took that decision. And then when it's built, I'm finding something that is actually, the building has a soul that is beyond me. It's like you have a child, and then the child becomes bigger than the parents, you know. And I think every building, if it's designed honestly, it should have a life of itself. So the architect should actually work more like a generative force and try to put that soul into that building and let the building actually grow and grow by others. You know, this is why, for example, while Jordan, a couple of years ago, they did renovation. And so people are phoning me, they're ruining your building, they're changing the color. And they said, no, you know, buildings have to grow and they have to change and they should be renovated and pushed and you know, adaptive reuse maybe as well. So it's a living organ, you know, it's a living body. So I think I'm not sure if I answered exactly your point or. No, okay.
Like as usual, because also you're making you're allowing me to ask Sarah a question. So I feel like what you just said about growth intersects a lot with publishing from the perspective of how we were thinking about it while working on the series. So my question to you is, what do you think is kind of like, where does publishing and architecture like dance together? And especially in the sense of life and transmission and growth. So when we're highlighting architects such as Ammar with practices that are almost like margin, but not margin because it's unthought of, not because it's supposed to be on the margin. Where do you position the architecture series, like the Dongola architecture series, in that realm of life on its own, growth, etc.?
So,
This one.
residential. So, while Ammar was talking, and in that perspective, my immediate question would be, oh, Ammar, where is the human in all of your, you know, thought process, building and thinking? And it looks like a massive geology, planet Earth, rocks, but where's the human part of it? Do you make buildings for humans, or do you make them to just integrate the soil and the earth and become part of it? And so that brings me to your question, which is today in books were always a very sacred and important part of our lives as we grew in another age than the younger people here. And this evolution that we live in today is transformative. Books are not anymore what they used to be. That's clear. And there is a definite question of what do we make out of it? How do we actually not run, but surf the wave, becoming surfers actually, and be relevant, because relevance is it's an important factor that we have to keep continuously think of. How do we make ourselves relevant to the public out there? We're not making books for ourselves. We're making books to transmit and to share. And so maybe today in the architectural series, what we're interested in is in the human behind Ammar as a person, not as a building. And we find that that's actually very valuable. And that is what we would like to highlight and push out there and make sure that the world knows about it, because yeah, that's what we'd like to do.
I want to follow up a little bit on this by saying also this, speaking about the person and architecture and series, there's something that can only be wielded or excavated in intimacy that I feel is missing in the architecture conversation. So when we're talking about, let's say, Starchitects, it's about the wonder of the magic of whatever the hell they did. Or if we're talking about buildings historically, it's how they were built by people with visions about the future. But then in reality, the human scale, what we feel on a daily basis is generated by also feelings that can be accessed through conversations that are super one-to-one and super close. So there's something there also about growth. And I feel the growth that happens in conversation that I hope passes through in the book, because it's not a book about greatness or like us being starstruck, although we are. It's a book about really an invitation into a very, very intimate space that I feel is generative in your practice for you, and also probably with the people that you work with, but also generative in each of our practices once this comes across. So that's not a question, but I felt like
No, I think there's a point here that, let's all face it, we are bombarded with so much media. We see in every day maybe 100 times more images than a Roman person 2,000 years ago in his or her entire life, you know, because they would have seen a fresco or, I don't know, some mosaic floor. But now what I call it the cheapening of the image. The images are so cheap because we don't have to print them. We see them on our smartphones and on our tablets, and so we are bombarded with this amazing abundance of images. You know, Pinterest and you know, Instagram and Facebook, and I remember, like in the 80s, we would buy, you know, Architecture Digest or some magazine, and they were very expensive. 20 or 15 JDs, you know, because they're colored, you know. And now imagine how cheap is the image. And what happened with the media is that architecture was hijacked to serve the image. I mean, they have this big beast who's eating so much images. So architects followed, you know, that beast to produce more for that food, you know. So a lot of architects start designing building to be published, not to be lived in, because they look stunning. And I'll tell you another secret. I mean, good architecture is very difficult to photograph. It doesn't have to look nice on photography. Examples are works by Peter Zumthor, for example. While then you have the star architects, without mentioning names, who make buildings that are stunning as pieces of published. They look lovely on Instagram. But this is not good, not necessarily good art. It can be, but it's normally is not good architecture. It's actually a visual composition that is, you know, gimmicky, and that is just to shock. So we have, and I think publishing houses now have the responsibility to maybe it's almost a hopeless case, to counterbalance that invasion of the image, which is actually derailing the public and public opinion, you know, deceiving people that what is good architecture and what is not good, you know. I mean, there's a nice saying again by Peter Zumthor, who worked together on a project in Jericho, but when he said that architecture is not about form, it's about atmosphere. I mean, you can take a photo of a form, but you cannot take a photo of an atmosphere. So again, very good architecture is architecture that is not made to be photographed, you know, and often it's very difficult to produce good photography for good architecture, you know, because it's about the feeling which the camera doesn't capture, you know. And I think this is a big battle for publishing houses that are trying to, you know, a little bit make a wake-up call, if you will, and say, wait a minute, there are some hidden, you know, talents, and there's some people are doing things differently and who are actually warning about the danger of this total hijack of mass media to the architectural profession, and of course a lot of politics go in here, and also a lot of you know, those fast, you know, electronic publications and even books actually feed on the gimmicky images, because this is their way to reach the wider public, and it's a little bit unfair because it's actually spreading architecture that is very shallow.
I feel selfish if I ask more questions, because we asked, like, maybe we could start also opening it up for questions while we continue the conversation, rather than just us having a good time.
Very good. I just wanted to add one thing about not only the human part, but also the time that it takes. The time producing images and this generation of content and thoughts on all our devices is very quick and very, it loses a lot of time that we need as a human to really make things happen. And there's a word you used, is spontaneous, but actually thinking about things takes time. And this is where making a book allows us to really take the time and do it on our own. So if anyone has a question here.
Thank you for this very inspiring talk. So you mentioned spirituality and the atmosphere of a place, also in architecture. They would call it the genius loci.
Yeah.
So my question is, like, how would you design the spirit of a space? You know, something that is immaterial, something you cannot touch when you are in the phase of design. How can you guarantee that this is the, you know, the effect that it would create? So how would you go about something like that?
I think by time, from my experience, I try to remember when did I feel spirituality, you know, when do I receive a charge of spirituality? So if I go to Petra, that I know so well, not the treasury, I mean the other unknown parts, Petra you can never finish. And I go to a place that is so spiritual, but has no ornaments, you know, it's not the treasury itself, but other minimalist, and they look so modern. But I try to actually understand, why do I feel that feeling? And I'm extremely scientific, you know, I don't like to go in pseudoscience. I'm a big fighter even on Facebook with this, you know, pseudo rubbish, people who come up with crazy theory that are so outlandish, and they're against all the known archaeology and known accepted academic you know, consensus, if you will. But I think that materials have certain power. We don't know, we haven't finished science. We've just started barely scratching this skin of science in the last 100, 200 years. And we never know what we will discover later. But And I started actually even in my office experimenting a little bit, now you can buy a small little device that is doing brain scan. It's not expensive, maybe $500, and connect to a computer, and you can in fact control a computer by your thought. But also that has interesting readings. You can read if your brain, if you're angry or happy or afraid, or all the emotional qualities. Like it has 6, and now the new versions probably have 11 or 12 or more. Getting better by time. And I wanted to do a project where we give it to people and they go to a mud house and then look at and print, their brain scan, and then take them to a concrete house and print it, and then take them to a mud house that is fake, that it has actually, probably the best is to blindfold them so the eyes are not working. And that's another subject I will be talking about, which is very important about the, I'll come back to it. It's very tricky, but anyway, so it's important to do some research. We have very, very weak research in that. We don't have architects or collaborating with neurology. I've tried to start something like that at UAV University in Venice, and talking to one of the professors that she is connected to a top-notch neurologist to actually try to see what happens why do we feel this when we are next to granite compared if we're in an airplane or aluminum, or do we have any do we have any scientific paper? Actually, I don't think we do. If you Google anything in that, the impact of material on besides the electric, magnetic waves, I'm talking about like solid material. So spirituality is a survival kit. We feel spiritually well and high, actually intoxicated, when you go to the beach or when you hear birds singing, because we are actually at the tip of a species that indirectly inherited the use of other species existence, like singing birds, as a sign of clean atmosphere and no toxins in the atmosphere. For example, my sister was telling me when the Iraq war was happening, they were told that if the birds disappear from the sky completely, means there's a chemical attack. So we are programmed to actually enjoy the butterflies, not because they're beautiful, because our brain has been programmed. You're born with a full hard disk that has a built-in program. Okay, you can add things to it, but so this is why when you feel well in nature, it means that your genetics have kept a memory that protects your body from dangers, and you're in a place that is safe. So how can architecture do that? This is the question. And I think it's a lot of research is needed. We don't see much work with architecture and psychology. This is a huge gap for those who want to actually become, international heroes, if you wish. Just find these new connections and work on them, and you'll be the first to publish a paper on that. Issues like, people have claustrophobic feelings or light toxicity. We're bombarded with light, which is only 100-year-old. So I think, again, spirituality is, but you have to be careful. I don't get any spirituality when I go to decorated architecture, like even in classical buildings. But I get more spirituality when I go to a quarry, Carrara quarry near Milano, or even a factory. A good, I think a good silo, building like that unfortunate building in Beirut that was bombed. These big tubes, and they're very spiritual to me, and they're designed by engineers. Zero architecture there, but they're very, very powerful. Or dams, if you've seen big dams that have water behind them, and those purely functional structures can be extremely spiritual. And for me, geological formation is the most of that. You know, when I go to Wadi Rum and you really feel something that is, I don't know what it is. It could be radiation. It could be, and Wadi Rum does have radiation because the granite is much more radioactive, let's say, than limestone. So again, there are a lot of questions that we don't know. But we do feel well in some spaces, and after a while, I can use that. I can use these factors to take a design decision without fully understanding, and this is now happening in science and technology. For example, we now use quantum physics, you know, in your iPhone. And nobody understands it, but we're using it. So, and what's happening now, that there's so much happening and so much data, we don't have time to understand. You know, things are going so fast, we don't have time to understand.
We've got a question from the internet, from Ruby. To what extent do you think we have the right to preserve the architectural identity of the city versus the power of business, as we are witnessing the invasion of modern buildings in Al-Webdi, for instance, which saddens my heart when seeing how it's offending the authenticity of this area?
Yeah, it's a very exciting question. On the way I was driving and I looked at this building, which is in front of the church. And to be honest, I saw, you know, like a cafe with young people working in there and having coffee, and I felt happy. That building has completely effaced or completely ruined at the same time, has ruined the face of Jabal Webdi from Jabal Amman, because it covered the church. But this is not the mistake of I think the guy who built it is an Iraqi guy, but it's not the mistake of the owner. It's a mistake of the municipality, because the municipality never took that preserving the heritage seriously, because if they could have bought from him the upper 3 floors, the right of use of the upper 3 floors, and paid him cash, you know, because he bought it on the condition to build his full right. So what we call in America, they call transfer of development rights. So he has development rights, but he can transfer it to somebody else. So the government should have bought those and told him he can build on 1 floor or 2 floors. I mean, the church is in a good shape because it had a big pedestal. It's not low, it's a high church. And that could have kept the window open. But I have to be careful. I'm not into, you know, those people who are against gentrification, and we cannot talk about gentrification. I mean, Jabal Webdi didn't get gentrification. Gentrification is when you have a shanty town or a squatter who becomes fashionable. But Jabal Webdi was very high class. You know, it was the Abdoun of Amman in the 20s. This is buildings 20s when people, the rich people, Hamoud family who built this house, moved out of, let's say, the basin and went on the rim, and that was the first rim in the 30s, and then 40s, 50s, and then all the way 60s to Terra Santa and the National Gallery at the end of Jabal Webdi. So those rings grew, and they were, you know, those were the Abdounis, and this was the high class of the city. So, and then it started dying in the 80s and 90s to almost a dangerous level, you know. So I have a mixed feeling. I don't think we can stop time, but we have to regulate. We are weak in regulation, you know, and still till now, when we have the Tarath law, it's not even a law, by the way. You know, you could, the municipality will stop you pulling down your building, but you can go to court and pull it down. You know, they actually make your life hell, but it's not yet a legal. You know, the way I understand it is not yet, but now they are starting building. A friend of mine bought a house near the 4th Circle, and they used one tool of protecting heritage. There are 5 tools. One of them is eminent domain, is to buy. The other one is instruction. This is what we're using. Third is incentive. So they used the third one, incentive. They actually told him that we exempt you from the taxes of Rusum Tashkil, the registration fees, exactly. So this is another tool, and the last two is a transfer of development rights, and the last one is information education. So those are 5 tools. They can use one of them or all of them. And I don't think we're doing it right in Jebel Wabda. But again, I think Jebel Wabda is not in a very bad shape. It's probably doing better than Jebel Amman, First Circle or Rainbow Street. And what the status that you have right now will not remain. It's a living neighborhood, and probably can be organized easily. You know, they could make more parking by municipality, maybe have better mobility strategies, and that's happening because of apps. You know, things like Google Maps with Uber had made a big difference. A lot of people can make open businesses, and I can come and have dinner without having problem with parking because I can take an Uber. And more apps will appear that will make life easier. And then now the electric cars and smart cars, you know, in 10 years we'll have cars without drivers, and that will make Jebel Wabda much better, because a lot of people could actually consider living without a car, and they would have a common car, you know, that comes to you when you need it, and without a driver, so you don't have to have, you know, a taxi driver smoking in there. So, and it takes you safely to the place, no headache on the way, and no stories and all that stuff. So that will happen, and it's getting cleaner because electric cars are cleaner. So I don't want to be too, you know, pessimistic that Jebel Wabda is finished and is ruined. The other option that if what's happening now didn't happen, also Jebel Wabda will become more like a deserted place. There's some elder families and elder men and women living in some houses, but is that a good thing? No, you know, it's part of the city that is will be rotting, you know, will be dead tissue. The nice thing, the Jebel Wabda is not dead tissue, but immediately if you go towards the central bank, and Abdali becomes dead tissue, and all of downtown is dead tissue, by the way. All of downtown, it's gargarine, you know, it's actually body that is fermenting and stinky. In downtown, you only have a veneer of life, which is only 3 meters where you walk, and only ground floor. All the upper floor of downtown are dead, and if you go behind, you have dead cats and rubbish, you know. Unlike London or Paris or any city that is, or even Beirut, you know, which is alive, the tissue is alive. So we have to be careful, you know, with this, not to be too romantic about preserving something. Cities change and grow, but we have to regulate, you know. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for this gathering and this nice opportunity. I don't have a question. I just want to show my appreciation to Ammar's notes regarding photography and architecture. This is really an interesting thought. And talking about photography, when I browsed the book, I realized that it didn't have a photograph of Ammar, like full page, with an interesting portrait pose. So this is also a nice reflection of Ammar's modesty and humble. The book is full of his works and his practices, but also I think it's a nice detail. I just found it in the book. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Hussein.
Now I would feel rude to not thank you, so I would like to show my appreciation as well. Given the fact that you have chosen to practice architecture in a non-academic way, and maybe enlarging the span of not just architecture, archaeology, biology, and all of that, what do you suggest so we can make the the architecture teaching methods in schools better? How can we integrate that, and how can we make the umbrella of architecture bigger?
Yes, I actually was lucky to be exposed to what's happening also in Europe. I was teaching for 2 summers at University of Venice, and I was also teaching for 2 semesters at GSAP, which is the Columbia University in New York, graduate school. And so I was exposed to what is the mix, you know, and there's of course a very tough competition between the top 10 in the world. Some go more, you know, computer, 3D printing and all that kind of stuff. And others go more physical model making and material research, if you will, etc. There's so many other options, but I think we are in a very difficult time right now, and I personally have major doubts that architecture, both as a profession and as education, will survive till 2050. I really doubt it. Because, you know, I think in 5-10 years, you have fantastic app and you can, or chat GTP if you want, you know, you tell them I want 3 rooms, I have 1 kid and my husband doesn't like bright light in the morning. So, you know, you chat to that computer. And then in half an hour, you have 20 houses, you know, options. And then it knows where you are, you give it the site, it will give you light analysis and wind and air and soil test and everything, because it knows the address. It will dig up all the soil reports of your neighbors. And so, I mean, so I have to be very careful. If I am writing a brief for a new school of architecture in Jordan or anywhere, I would specialize, definitely. This is a mistake we have in Jordan. We have, I don't know, now a dozen of universities that are producing so many architects, and they're all repeating the same stuff. So they should specialize. One could do biomimicry, the other could do material, you know, research, the other could do more, you know, fractal math, whatever. My advice is to actually look at niches that are forgotten, and blend architecture with another discipline. I mentioned it before. Again, you know, in education, it will be superb for Jordan to create the first architectural department in the world that actually talks about architecture and psychology. There are few papers that are interesting, and people have done studies on healing, speed and process of hospital rooms looking at green compared to the other side of the hospital looking at the highway. And they've actually found amazing numbers that show that green makes you heal faster. So, but we have to know more, you know, this is the beginning. There's few ideas. So I think that's the future, is actually to look at unexplored alleys in knowledge, you know, otherwise the donkey work of architecture will collapse as a business altogether, and as education, because computers, and we're having now robotics and 3D printing, and you know, so it's a very dangerous time to be stuck into the mass production, even economically. You know, you don't want to be a draftsman in an office because it's donkey work and your wage will be so low, you know. But it's very difficult to jump. You know, I'm very lucky to have clients who are willing to pay for all this philosophy that I'm talking about. And now I'm happy that I have clients who are looking for that. In fact, they're using some of my terminology in design briefs of competitions for other projects, you know. So I'm happy that, you know, to catch or to be in the right time for all of this to happen to me. But it's very difficult to start as an architect and have all these ideas, and but then you have clients who want you to design them an apartment building, you know, a simple stuff that is, and this is difficult. How do you cross that line of, you know? So again, in education, I think it's very difficult, and I think good education. Jordan University was fantastic, and in the 90s and 2000, our education is going downhill like many other things, but German University was even better before. And Jordan had something weird because, you know, we were like 5 million now, or 10 million, but we produced very interesting people, you know, Ja'far Tuqan, Rasim Badran, and big names compared to the size of our city or our country compared to Egypt. I mean, there are 100 million. Okay, Hassan Fathi, okay, fine. But I can hardly remember names, you know, but, and even Lebanon was perfect. But look at Syria, you know, I mean, Syria has universities in 1800. I mean, way before us, education in Syria is way older than Amman. But look at their architecture, and there's almost zero coming out of Syria. So this is actually interesting that Jordan had something, I don't know, something in the water, something happened that produced good architecture in the 80s, you know, and 90s. You agree?
Because like my question is really about public based on it. That's what I'm thinking about. Where do we factor that? Microphone. Hi, people. Okay, so I'm wondering. So when we talk about technology, when we talk about architecture, people, clients, etc., one like villain is public taste, and I know that it's not a villain per se, but it's part of the conversations I'm having with several people in different disciplines. Like, how do you deal with what people want, knowing that what people don't have either time or the education to invest to understand what is needed. So like I may want a diamond-studded building with like pink crowns, and it would be amazing. And as a service provider, you need to give me that, not you, someone else. But when the city forms, you would have these questions about the change of the landscape, the kind of violence to the land because of a dominant public taste or a dominant political discourse. That could be the reason why a lot of architects weren't really. So my question is, where do you see that going? I mean, a lot of what's interesting about what you're saying is that even though there's a dominant pessimism towards technology, you can bring it back to something that is interesting discourse-wise. But still, people will use ChatGPT to make horrible things that we need to live with in the city. Where does public taste factor into what you're talking about?
There are 2 points here that I'd like to mention. First of all, you know, I have no right to. I think it's a beautiful thing that people build their dreams, you know, and as ugly as they are. So I'm not a beauty police to actually tell people how they want to live, and they can make nasty architectural statements, and they do, you know. In Jordan we have disasters. But again, everywhere. But again, this is nice, you know. Isn't it nice that people who worked hard, and maybe sometimes not, they probably, I don't know, made money laundry. Regardless, there's another subject. But isn't it nice that those people could build their dreams? That's nice. But another thing, let's take all this architecture and compare it to car manufacturing. You have a communal safety standards, which, and this is where the government, the city, if you're in the city, you can go to the desert and make a dangerous building and live in it and make it very ugly and very unsafe and fall on your head, fine. But if you're in the city, in Medina is a contract. It's a social contract if you're in the city within a neighborhood. Which means then you have the neighborhood association, they have the mayor, and then you have the government, and then it has to actually deal with your house like a Toyota car. It has to be accident proof, it has to be insulation, good insulation, energy efficient, regardless of the shape of it. You know, so there's another fight altogether. And I think personally, if governments allow or force people who are in the city, who are signed that contract, you know, of citizenship or social contract, if you will, social architectural contract. If that happens, the intelligent, smart buildings are always good-looking buildings, you know, because people will be putting their money in insulation, into good, you know, you have the openings are measured right, and the orientation is measured right because of software, not because of the taste of an architect. And that will become a beautiful building, you know, because it's how biology makes beautiful creatures because of logic of survival. The same thing with architecture. So again, I'm not worried about some, you know, beautiful or not beautiful, as much as I'm worried about buildings that become a burden on the environment and on society and on the city, and also on the psychology of citizens. The problem with buildings, even more than cars, is that they are part of your experience and they are forced on you. So you go from here to your school or to your business, and you pass by buildings that are jumping at you and in an aggressive way and unacceptable. And this is why in the West you have neighborhood associations and people. Buildings have to be put in the mayor's municipality hall, city hall, and then people can take the building to court and make a big fight and stop it from being built, because it is part of communal space. The public realm is public property, and architecture. Everything about public realm is architecture. I mean, it's life between buildings. I don't care how people live inside the building, but I own the space between buildings. Thank you.
Holding the mic gives me a privilege. I'd like to address a question after thanking you, Ammar. Thank you, Ra'fat. Actually, it amazed me that you used medical metaphor when you talk about downtown, talking about gangrene and death and dead tissues. I come from a dental background. Originally, I'm a dentist. I went in the industry, then I gave lectures for architecture students in the American University in Cairo. So I do believe that there are three phenomena related together when we talk about architecture. It's architecture, language, and body. That's what amazed me when you talked about downtown in comparison to Beirut and Amman. So would you please reflect a little bit about this? Because I'm working on something related to that. When you're talking about shifting from the main street into downtown and 3 meters, it's like a border crossing. This is very known in our bodies. It's the different classification between different cells. So I would like to hear a little more about that before we finish our.
Well, thank you. I mean, medically, the definition of gangrene is a tissue that is deprived from circulation. So think of downtown when these areas are not accessible, and then the medical signs of the death of tissue are a couple of things, but most important that I can remember right now is change of color and smell. So we have this in water. We have a project in Saudi Arabia where water starts stinking because it's dying and changed color. So downtown, if you go into behind this living veneer to the dead tissue, which is much bigger. Tissue is very fat and veneer very thin. You have change of smell, and then you have change of color, and basically it's all had to do with I would imagine 2 things: circulation, which is like lack of access, but there's another thing which is, I would call it close to genetics in human body, or autoimmune disease, if you will, which is basically the inheritance law. And families cannot take a decision because there's a very big number of ownership per plot, But downtown is definitely the stomach of Amman. And if you go to Khirbat Samra, that's the end of, when you eat, everything goes to Khirbat Samra. So Amman is like a human body, and it stinks.
I would like to imagine it.
But Khirbat Samra, for those who don't know, it's like after Zarqa, it's where all the sewage go. And then you have, what's important now, you have things like nervous system, which is telephones, and our nervous system was more, cars are like blood circulation and roads are blood. We are cells, white cell and red cells. But the telephone company is the nervous system, but now we have another nervous system, which is the iPhone and the mobile, which is and those are so fast. Nervous system is very fast. We can walk to downtown, but you can make a call to downtown. Is the same with in the body. The blood circulation takes time, but if I'm pushing my hand, it's very instantaneous, electrical. So again, it's very important to take tools from other and to understand the city in this metaphor, but it's not just metaphor, it's almost actually, it works perfect. Yeah. Thank you.
That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I was looking at the slideshow and I just realized that we didn't talk, I'm just going to slip it in, but people are going to read about it. When we talk about resource management in your work, there was something that is very, very interesting when speaking about design. Some of the work, or a lot of the work, starts with like labor design. Like you look at the site and the project from the perspective of who's going to build it, how's it going to build, and how the resources are being managed. And I found that interesting. My question is a little bit about the projects that we didn't discuss in the book, which are now your more recent projects that have to do with a much more macro kind of scale. So working huge projects in the desert. How do you reconcile this idea of labor? I mean, besides the resources that exist, are you also looking into choreographies of how things are built, or is this being delegated elsewhere?
Well, I give a life example. We are now in the middle of a design of a resort. This is not secret anymore. We are in a place in Al-Ula called Shar'an Reserve, and we share with Shar'an. We share a site, our project, and a project being designed by Jean Nouvel, and we are like 4 kilometers apart. And we have some joint, back of house. Now, he is digging into the rock, and it's going very difficult to execute, and etc. But it's going on because this has been approved by the Saudis, and our project is much more. We're cutting as well part of the mountain, and we're making a shelf on top of the mountain or the upper shoulder of the mountain. But now in the new competitions, we're working on like maybe 4 projects or more. New competitions, the clients started to actually ask, how do you build it? And because they don't want surprises. And also they want to make sure that we come up with innovative way, maybe unheard, some parts are unheard, like, I'm thinking now of casting on the sand dunes and using, I'm interested in paleontology. There's a part of fossil, which the animal body doesn't exist, and we call it trace fossil. So it's like a dinosaur that died, and the skin of the dinosaur got imprinted on the mud, and the dinosaur disappeared, probably eaten by other dinosaurs. But the imprint is there, and then you have a dust storm or something, another material, and so we have the fantastic negative of the body. So I'm interested, and to be honest, architecture is a trace fossil. I mean, this building is a fossil of life, let's say in the 30s and 40s, and then we disappear after 1,000 years. People come from Mars and look at this, and that's a trace fossil because the animal, us, doesn't exist anymore, but the shell is there. And so I'm interested in this kind of positive, negative. Of course, Nabateans did the beautiful experimentation with that by building by cutting, building by removal instead of addition. So, in a way, I like to actually push on the idea of using an example where I'm using paleontology or trace fossil as a process, and make sure if I can borrow or steal. Good designers steal ideas, not just borrow them from nature, because some of the ideas in nature are so complex, and I can just take them. I can actually employ nature for free, to give me very, very complex design. And you can do this by, for example, if you cast concrete on sand, you can shape the sand, you can let the air shape the sand, or you can get the sea or animals shape the sand. And when animals shape the sand, we call them cruziana in the sedimentation in Wadi Rum and Ras al-Naqab. Actually, we have these trace fossils of trilobite, this special animal. So you can actually take that complex file and for free, it's there. And so this is why, I think what I can do is look at the site as the site is the architect. I mean, this is one thing that I keep repeating every time in my office. And the site is, our site is the galaxy, and then the solar system, and then the Earth, and then Jabal Wabde or Middle East, and Jabal Wabde, and then Hawuz, then Dar al-Funun, and then those are all sites. It includes also the Jordanians, the heritage, Jamid, our food, that's part of the site. The temperatures and the knowledge of the people and the labor, do I want to make labor intensive design? So, and I've done this for USAID, Madaba and other projects. So we built buildings that were designed to be labor intensive. They were designed to have no contractor and employ maximum number of laborers, untrained laborers, not a central contractor. So it depends, but labor and know-how, construction know-how is part of the site as well. And also the cultural values is part of the symbolism, let's say, of material and shapes, also part of the site. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.